Clara Whitmore had exactly 14 minutes before the last market cart left the village square, and she was already running late because of him. Not him personally, his name, his estate, his shadow that seemed to stretch over every road that led anywhere useful in the county of Hartwell. She grabbed her basket from the kitchen table, tucked her shawl tighter around her shoulders, and pushed through the cottage door before her mother could call after her with another warning she had already memorized by heart. The lane outside was narrow and packed with loose stone. It curved downhill toward the village the way an old man walks, slow and careful and slightly tilted. Clara knew every dip in it. She had walked it since she was 4 years old, holding her father's hand, learning the names of things, the names of flowers, the names of neighbors, the names of families that were safe to greet. And the one name that was not, Ashford. Her father had said it the way other men said curse words, low and tight, as if even the syllables carried something foul. Duke Ashford of Greymere. The man whose family had taken land, had broken agreements, had turned neighbors into enemies and called it business. The man whose grandfather had, according to her own grandfather, destroyed what little financial ground the Whitmore family had ever stood on. Clara had never asked for details. She had been raised in a household where the feud was not a story you explained. It was simply a fact, like winter, like the way the creek flooded every March. You did not question it. You stepped around it. You learned to walk carefully. She had been doing exactly that for 23 years. The village square smelled of bread and horse and damp earth. She moved through it quickly, nodding to people she recognized, keeping her eyes forward. Old Mrs. Perrin called out from her doorway about some herbs she had saved. Clara waved but did not stop. She had learned long ago that stopping led to conversations, and conversations in Hartwell led almost always, eventually, to the same subject. At the grain merchant's stall she paid for 2 sacks of flour, arranged for them to be delivered, and was about to leave when she heard it. His name, said casually, by a young farmer with flour on his boots and no idea what he was doing. Duke Ashford had the East Road repaired apparently, whole stretch of it, paid out of his own pocket. Clara did not slow her step. She filed the information in the place she kept such things, the place where facts about him accumulated despite her best efforts, and she kept walking. She had other things to think about. Winter was close. The stores were not what they should be. Her mother's knee had been bad since September, which meant Clara was carrying more of the household work than usual, which meant she was tired in the particular way that crept into your bones and sat there. She was tired of being careful with money. She was tired of apologizing for things that were not her fault. She was tired of being the person who kept everything running while pretending to everyone, including herself, that it was fine. But she was not tired enough to be careless. Careless meant venturing down roads that crossed onto Ashford land. Careless meant forgetting which families in the county had social ties to him, which would make a greeting awkward, or a favor complicated. Careless meant letting her guard down in ways that could cost her family what little standing they had left, in a place where standing was the currency that kept you fed. She was not careless. She was very good at this. It was not a skill she had chosen, but she had it. Back at the cottage, she set the kettle on and sat at the table while the water heated. Her mother was in the next room, moving slowly, the familiar rhythm of her careful steps audible through the thin wall. Outside, the sky had turned a color that Clara could not quite name. Not gray, not quite. Something between gray and green, like the world was trying to decide something. She noticed it the way you notice a sound that stops. A sudden wrongness in the air. Her mother came in and stood at the window. "Weather's turning," her mother said. "It'll pass." Her mother looked at her with the particular expression she had when she did not argue but did not agree either. That night, the first wind came. It was not dramatic. It was not the howling chaos that stories described. It was simply wind, steady and cold and pushing against the shutters with a persistence that felt personal. Clara lay in her narrow bed and listened to it. She was not afraid of storms. She had sat through plenty of them in this cottage, in this bed, with the same shutters knocking and the same old roof holding. She told herself that was what this was. She told herself it while the wind grew louder. She told herself it until, sometime before dawn, a sound like a crack ran through the air outside, sharp and decisive, and she heard the old oak at the edge of the property come down. In the morning, the lane was blocked. Not slightly inconvenient, blocked. The oak had come down across it completely, its roots having given way in ground that was now soft with the rain that had come in behind the wind overnight. Clara stood at the cottage door and looked at it. The tree was enormous up close, far larger than it had appeared standing. The branches reached across the lane to the opposite wall, and beyond them the lane continued, but unreachably. Her mother stood behind her. "You'll need to go around," her mother said. Around meant the long way. The long way added 40 minutes in good conditions. The sky, this morning, was not promising good conditions. "I can manage it," Clara said. "Take your heavy coat." "I know." She took her heavy coat, she took her basket. She took the list of things they needed from the village, the same list she had been adding to all week, the small and necessary items that kept a household running when you were trying very hard not to spend more than you had. She started out. For the first hour, the walk was simply uncomfortable. The ground was wet, and the wind was still coming, lower now and steadier, the kind that did not knock you over but wore at you. She kept her head down. She knew this road well enough that she did not need to look up often. The second hour was when the sky changed again. She had been watching the road immediately in front of her when the light shifted. She looked up. The clouds had done something she had not expected. Instead of the gray ceiling she had left under, there was now a ceiling and something beneath it, something darker and faster moving, and the two layers seemed to be moving in different directions at once, which was the kind of thing that, in her experience, meant nothing good. She realized, in the wrong place. She had taken the long way around. The long way had put her on a stretch of open road with no shelter in any direction that she could see immediately. The nearest building she knew was the Pembury barn, but that was another 20 minutes, and 20 minutes in this light, with the wind now picking up in a way that felt urgent and alive, was a very long time. She started moving faster. The rain, when it came, did not begin gradually. It arrived the way some decisions arrive, all at once, as if it had been waiting for exactly this moment. Within 2 minutes she was soaked through her coat. Within 5, the road itself had become a problem, the water sheeting across it in thin, fast rivers that made her footing uncertain. She was cold in a way she had not anticipated, the kind of cold that sat behind her eyes and made thinking harder. She needed to stop. She looked up to get her bearings, and that was when she saw it. A gate. Iron, tall, set into a stone wall that stretched in both directions as far as she could see. Beyond the gate, a lane lined with old trees that she could just make out through the rain. And at the end of that lane, barely visible, a shape that was the shape of a house, a large house. She knew exactly whose gate it was. She had known this land was nearby. She had known it in the way that you know something and choose not to think about it too clearly. Greymere. The Ashford estate. She was standing at the edge of it, in the worst storm she had been caught in for years, and she was very cold, and the only shelter within practical reach was on the other side of that gate. She stood there for a moment. The rain did not slow down while she thought about it. The wind did not ease. The cold did not become more negotiable. She thought about her family's name and what it meant to use it carefully. She thought about her father's voice saying that word, Ashford, the way he said it. She thought about 23 years of being exact and disciplined and never crossing the line that had been drawn for her long before she was old enough to understand it. Then she thought about the cold behind her eyes. Then she pushed open the gate. The lane beyond it was better. The trees cut the worst of the wind. Her feet were soaked through, and her hands had gone past cold into something that was almost warm in a wrong way. The way cold gets when it stops hurting and starts becoming comfortable, which she knew enough to be afraid of. She walked toward the house. The door was not as far as it had looked from the gate, or perhaps she was walking faster than she realized. She did not look up until she was close enough to see the steps, wide stone steps, and the door at the top of them, heavy and dark. She climbed the steps. She raised her hand to knock, and she stood there for a second that felt longer than it was, her wet hand raised, her whole life on one side of something, and whatever came next on the other. She knocked. The sound of it was swallowed immediately by the wind, small and inadequate. She waited. She knocked again, harder this time, her knuckles complaining about it. And then the door opened. Not by a servant, not by a housekeeper. The door opened and there was a man standing in the frame of it, tall, with dark eyes that registered her appearance without any particular expression of triumph or mockery, without the contempt she had been half bracing for, without anything except a simple and direct acknowledgement that there was a person on his doorstep in the rain. He held a lamp. The light from it caught the lines of his face, which was not the face she had constructed in her imagination over 23 years of careful avoidance. "Come in," he said. 2 words, no preamble, no performance. She hesitated for just a moment. Then she stepped inside. The warmth of the entrance hall hit her like something physical. She had not realized how completely the cold had settled into her, until she felt the contrast of it. The hall was lit by candles in a bracket on the wall and the lamp he still carried, and the combined light made it feel almost amber, almost like an afternoon in a season that was not this one. She stood on the stone floor and dripped. "There's a fire in the side room," he said. He was already turning, moving toward a doorway to the left. "Come through when you're ready." He did not wait for her answer. He simply moved, as if the situation was obvious, as if strangers appeared on his doorstep in storms regularly, and the correct response was simply to light the fire and let them warm up. She stood there for another moment, aware that her coat was leaving a pool on his floor, and that she was still holding her basket, and that her hands were beginning to feel like her hands again, which hurt in the way that returning feeling always hurts. She followed him into the side room. He was crouching in front of a fireplace, coaxing something from embers into something more. She watched him do it without looking at her, without making anything of the situation, without performing hospitality or coldness or any of the things she had been half expecting. The fire caught. She did not say thank you. She did not say anything. She held her hands out toward the heat and let it begin the long work of reaching her. He stood, set the lamp on the mantel, and looked at her for the first time with any real attention. "You're a Whitmore," he said. It was not a question. "Yes," she said. He nodded, once, as if that settled something in his mind that had been slightly unsettled. "I'll have something hot brought," he said. And then he left the room. Clara stood at the fire and listened to the storm press against the windows and thought about the fact that she was warm and dry, or beginning to be dry, and that the man who had let her in had done so without a single word that required anything of her. She did not know what to do with that. She was very good at this. She had been doing this for 23 years. This was not something she knew how to do. The woman who brought her tea was called Nora. She was short, middle-aged, and moved through the room with the efficiency of someone who had been doing this work long enough that it required no thought. She set a tray on the small table near the fire without commentary, poured one cup, and looked at Clara's wet coat still draped over her arm, with the particular expression of someone who was about to say something practical. "Let me take that," Nora said. "I'll hang it near the kitchen stove." Clara handed it over. It seemed easier than explaining anything. Alone in the room again, she drank the tea and listened to the storm. It was not passing. That was the thing she had to admit to herself. Sitting in that firelit room with warmth returning to her fingers, and the sound of rain against glass being replaced by something louder and more determined, the storm was not a brief interruption. It was settling in. She could tell by the tone of it, the way the wind was not gusting in peaks and valleys but running as a constant, a steady pressure against everything that stood in its path. She looked around the room properly for the first time. It was a working room. Not a formal sitting room designed to impress. There was a desk near the far window covered in papers and ledgers. There were boots by the back door, which suggested this was a room someone actually used rather than kept. There were maps on one wall, not decorative maps but working ones, marked up with notations in small, careful handwriting. The shelves held books with broken spines, the kind that had been read and not just owned. She did not know what she had expected from the inside of Greymere. She had never allowed herself to picture it with any real detail. But she knew it was not this practical, slightly worn, inhabited by someone quality. She heard footsteps in the corridor. He came back into the room carrying nothing this time, just himself. He was taller than she had initially registered, though the low ceiling of the side room made the impression more concentrated. He moved to the window and looked out at the lane, the one she had come up, which was barely visible through the water running down the glass. "The lower road is flooded," he said, without turning around. "It usually goes when this much rain comes this fast. There's a point where the drainage can't keep up." She did not say anything. He turned from the window. "You came from the Whitmore land. That direction?" "Yes." "Then you can't go back that way tonight. The culvert near the Pembury barn will have gone over by now." He said it as information, not as a trap, not as anything except the plain geography of a flooded county. "You'll need to wait until it drops." Clara set down her cup. "I can't stay here," she said. He looked at her with an expression that was not unkind and not amused. It was simply level. "You can't go out in this either," he said. She wanted to disagree with him, but the windows made it difficult. The rain was now coming sideways, which was the kind of rain that made every argument about being fine irrelevant. She had barely made it to the gate, and she had been in better condition then. "There are rooms upstairs," he said. "Nora will show you. You're not under any obligation to speak to me or eat at my table or do anything at all. But you will be dry and warm, and the roads will be passable tomorrow or the day after, and then you can go." He said it all plainly, as if he were reading a list. No drama, no pointed reference to the history between their families. He said it, and then he waited, because apparently he was the kind of man who said things and waited. She felt something complicated moving through her that she did not immediately name. "Thank you," she said, because there was nothing else to say. The room upstairs was small but clean. Nora had put a hot water bottle in the bed and left a spare dress, larger than Clara's size but dry, folded on the chair. Clara changed into it, feeling slightly ridiculous and also very grateful, and sat on the edge of the bed and listened to the storm making its case against the roof. She thought about what her mother would be doing right now. Worrying, certainly. Trying not to worry visibly, which was the particular kind of worrying her mother specialized in. Making tea repeatedly, because making tea was something to do with your hands when there was nothing useful to do. Looking out the window at the rain and doing the math of the roads and coming up with numbers that were not comfortable. Clara needed to get word to her somehow, but there was no getting word to anyone in this storm. She would have to trust that her mother knew her well enough, knew the county well enough, to know that she had found shelter somewhere and was simply waiting. She did not think too hard about where her mother might imagine the shelter was. She lay down on the bed. The ceiling above her was plain white plaster with a small crack running from the window frame toward the center. She stared at it for a while and then, without entirely deciding to, she fell asleep. She did not know how long she slept. When she woke, the room was darker, which meant afternoon had passed, and the sound of the storm was different. Still present, still insistent, but the tone had shifted slightly, as if it had found its rhythm and stopped fighting to find it. She could smell food. She went downstairs following the smell, which led her past the side room and further down the corridor to a kitchen, where Nora was moving between the stove and a table laid for two. Clara stopped in the doorway. He was at the table already, reading something. A letter by the look of it. He looked up when she appeared. "Sit," he said, "if you want to." She sat, because she was hungry, and because standing in the doorway was not a dignified position to hold indefinitely. He went back to his letter. Nora put food on the table. For a few minutes the only sounds were the storm outside and the small sounds of two people eating in the same room without speaking. "You've been watching the estate books," she said. He looked up. She had not planned to say it. It had simply come out. The observation that had been sitting in the back of her mind since she saw his desk. "Yes," he said. "We saw the East Road work," she said, "in the village." He set down his fork. He looked at her carefully, not defensively, just carefully. "It needed doing. It's been poor for 3 years." "It's not your road," she said. "It's a public road." "Technically," he said, "but no one else was going to do it." She looked at him. He looked back at her. Neither of them said anything for a moment. She looked down at her plate. This was the thing she had not expected. Not the room, not the fire, not the dry dress or the food. She had not expected him to be the kind of person you could sit across a table from and have a conversation with that went nowhere dangerous. She had expected edges. She had expected something she could press against and find solid and confirming. Something that would allow her to say, "Yes, this is what he is, this is what they said he was." Instead there was a table, and food, and a man reading his letters. "How long do you think the water will take?" she asked. "In this much rain?" He considered it. 2 days, maybe 3 if it keeps going tonight. 2 days. 3 days. She looked at the window, at the darkness outside, and the way the rain ran down it in sheets. "Your family will wonder where you are," he said. It was not a question either. "My mother will figure it out," she said. She hoped it was true. He nodded. He picked up his fork again. He ate, and she ate, and the storm continued its opinion outside. Later, back in the side room that seemed to be the room in the house with the best fire, she sat with the tea that Nora kept appearing with, and thought about the things she knew about Duke Ashford. She knew the version her father had given her. The Ashford family had, 30 years ago, disputed a water right that had previously belonged to the Whitmore farm. They had won. The Whitmore farm had lost access to water from the East Creek, which had eventually forced a sale of the East Field, which had been the most productive field they owned. It had cascaded from there. Money that was not there. Land that was gone. A family that had shrunk itself down to the cottage and the lane and the careful management of what little remained. Her father had told her this when she was 12. He had told her it once, thoroughly, and then never in detail again, because that was how he handled pain. You named it once so it was real, and then you did not name it again, because there was nothing to be gained from it. She had carried it the way you carry something heavy for a long time. You stop noticing the weight, because it is always there. But she was sitting in a room that belonged to the man whose family had been the source of that weight, and the room was warm, and the man had fed her, and she was alive and dry instead of lost in the storm outside, and none of that fit neatly into the version she had been carrying. She did not know what to do with the way things did not fit. She heard footsteps in the corridor again, and then a knock at the open door. He stood in the doorway with his hands in his pockets, looking not quite at her and not quite away from her. "I'm going to look at the roof before the light goes completely," he said. "There's a section over the east wing that always gives trouble in this kind of rain. I thought you should know I'll be outside for a while, in case you needed anything." She looked at him. "Why would I need to know that?" she asked. He thought about it for a moment. "I don't know," he said. "It seemed like the kind of thing you tell someone who's staying in your house." He left. She stared at the fire. She had been in his house for 7 hours. In 7 hours he had opened the door without ceremony, lit the fire, arranged a room, provided food, and just now told her he was going to check the roof so she would know where he was. He had not once, mentioned the feud. She did not know whether that was kindness or strategy. She did not know whether it mattered. What she knew was that the storm was not going to stop tonight, and tomorrow was not going to be simple. And the version of Duke Ashford she had carried for 23 years was already, quietly and without any announcement, beginning to develop complications she had not prepared for. Outside, she could hear the wind. Inside, the fire burned. She pulled her knees up to her chest, wrapped her arms around them, and stayed very still, the way you stay still when you are standing on ground that you suddenly suspect might not be as solid as you thought, and you do not want to be the one who tests it. The morning came gray and insistent. Clara woke to the sound of rain that had not given up overnight, and for a moment, in the space between sleeping and fully waking, she forgot where she was. The ceiling was wrong. The light was wrong. The pillow smelled of lavender rather than the plain soap her mother used. Then she remembered, everything, in sequence, all at once. She lay still for a moment and listened. The storm was still present but quieter, the way a loud argument becomes a steady disagreement. It had not ended. It had simply settled into a commitment. When she came downstairs, he was already at his desk in the side room, writing something. He acknowledged her appearance with a glance and did not stop writing. There was tea on the small table near the fire and a plate of bread and butter that Nora must have left. She poured herself tea and looked at the maps on the wall. She had looked at them yesterday without really seeing them. Now she looked properly. They were maps of the county, and they were marked in detail, more detail than you would expect from something purely decorative. Roads were marked with notations about their condition. Fields were noted with numbers she did not immediately understand. The east road she had heard about in the village was circled, with something written in the margin in small script. She stepped closer to read it. He spoke without looking up from his writing. "That's the drainage note. The road kept failing because the culvert was the wrong size. Been the wrong size for 40 years. Nobody noticed, because nobody looked at the whole picture at once." She turned to look at him. "You figured that out yourself?" "Someone had to," he said. She looked back at the map. The annotation in the margin was a calculation. Someone, him presumably, had worked out the water volume for that stretch of road in a heavy rainfall, and compared it to the capacity of the existing culvert, and found the gap. It was the kind of thinking that was neither dramatic nor particularly clever in isolation, but it required someone to actually sit down and do it, and apparently nobody had done that in 40 years. "The cost of the repair came out of your own funds?" she asked. He set down his pen. He turned in his chair to look at her properly for the first time this morning. "My estate funds. There isn't a sharp line between the two, honestly. The road serves the whole county," she said. "Yes. You could have petitioned the county council." "I could have," he said. "I've tried before. It takes a long time and a lot of meetings, and the road keeps failing in the meantime. People fall. Carts break. It seems simpler to fix it." She turned back to the map. Outside, the rain continued. "There are other roads on there," she said. "Yes. Are those all projects you've funded?" A pause. "Not all of them. Some. Some are things I've lobbied for. A few are things the council eventually agreed to." She looked at the map for another long moment. The Whitmore Lane was not on it, but the road that connected to it was, and there was a note beside it that she could not read from where she stood without stepping closer, which she was not quite ready to do. She carried her tea to the window instead, and looked out at the flooded lane. "What is it that you want?" she asked. She heard him shift in his chair. "From what?" "From doing this." She gestured at the map without turning around. "The roads, the estate work. What is it you want from it?" There was a longer pause this time. "I want the county to work," he said finally. "That probably sounds simple." "It sounds like an answer you give people you don't trust with the real one," she said. Another pause. She could feel it. "That's fair," he said. She turned around. He was watching her with an expression she could not categorize. Not defensive, not pleased. Something in the space between two things she did not have names for. My father ran this estate for 20 years, doing what estates did in his time, he said, which was to extract value and maintain position. When I took over, I found the books and found the county, and found that what he had been doing had kept us comfortable, and kept everything around us slightly worse than it needed to be. I didn't want that to be the thing I left behind me. He said it without performance, simply, as if it were not a particularly remarkable thing to say. She stared at him. In her head, she was holding the version of his family her father had given her, the one about the water right and the east field, and the long cascade of loss. She was holding it up against this man at this desk with his maps and his drainage calculations and his undramatic explanation of why he fixed roads. The two things did not reconcile. She did not know what to do about that. The East Creek, she said. Her voice was steady, the water right. He went very still. My father told me, she said. I know what your father told you, he said. He said it quietly. Do you? Yes. He stood up. He walked to the window, not to look out of it, just to stand somewhere that was not his chair. That was 30 years ago. It was my father's decision, not mine. I know that doesn't make it different, but I want you to know I know what happened. And what do you think happened? She said. He looked at her. Your family lost something that was theirs, because my father wanted what was convenient and had the resources to fight for it, in ways your family couldn't. That is what happened. The legal details are what lawyers call it. She was quiet for a moment. You could have said that differently, she said, to make it sound smaller. I could have, he agreed. Why didn't you? He looked at her for a long moment. Because you deserve the true version, he said. The fire crackled, the rain pressed against the windows. Clara stood in the home of the man she had been raised to hate, and held the cup in both hands and felt something shift, very quietly, like a door moving on a hinge, barely perceptible, not open yet, just no longer entirely closed. She did not say anything for a while. When she finally spoke, her voice was level, the same careful level she had been trained her whole life to keep. The roof, she said. Did you find the problem last night? He looked at her for a moment, reading the change of subject. He let it go. Cracked, flashing on the east face, he said. Not as bad as it could be. Nora's nephew can patch it when the rain stops. Good, she said. She went back to the fire and sat down. He went back to his desk. The storm continued. Outside, somewhere in the flooded fields, the county was enduring what the season had brought it. And inside, without either of them naming it, something had begun. The second morning was different from the first in the way that all second days are different. The first day everything is sharp and strange. The second day, strangeness has softened just enough to let you see clearly, which is in some ways more dangerous. Clara came downstairs before Nora had finished in the kitchen, and she saw, through the open door at the end of the corridor, that he was outside, standing in the rain in a heavy coat, looking at something in the garden she could not identify from where she stood. He was not moving urgently. He was not performing any task. He was simply standing and looking, the way people stand when they are thinking through a problem and the body needs something to do while the mind works. She watched him for a moment, then went to help Nora with the breakfast things. Nora accepted this without comment. She was that kind of woman. She handed Clara a cloth and indicated the dishes on the rack, and they worked in the kitchen together in the comfortable silence of two people who have found their way to a mutual rhythm without needing to negotiate it aloud. He's been up since 5, Nora said eventually, without being asked. He often is? Every day I've worked here. Nora handed over a bowl. His father slept until 9. The sun was up before first light from the time he came back from school. Never changed. Clara dried the bowl. How long have you worked here? Since before his father died. 17 years. She said it the way you say a number that surprises you slightly every time. Not because it is large, but because it sits oddly beside the person you still feel yourself to be. And is he? Clara started, then stopped. Is he what? Nora said, plainly. Not encouraging, not discouraging, just asking. Is he a fair employer? Nora looked at her for a moment with an expression that was thoughtful rather than guarded. He's particular, she said, about doing things properly. He notices when something's been done wrong and says so, directly, but he also notices when something's been done right, and says that too. Most employers don't bother with the second part. She paused. Fair is probably the right word, yes. Clara put the bowl on the shelf. He came back inside while they were finishing. He pulled off his coat in the hallway, shook it once, and hung it on the hook without looking at it. He came into the kitchen, and Nora put tea in front of him without being asked. He looked at Clara standing at the counter. The water in the lane is dropping, he said. Slower than I'd like, but dropping. Another day, perhaps. Another day, she repeated. You could send word to your mother, he said. I can have one of the stable hands right around the North Road. It'll take longer, but it's passable. She had not thought of this. She should have thought of it immediately, and had not, which told her something about her state of mind that she did not examine directly. Yes, she said. Please, if that's possible. I'll arrange it. He sat down with his tea, and opened a ledger he had apparently brought from the side room at some point during the morning, and the kitchen settled into the quiet activity of a household beginning its day. Clara ate breakfast and thought about her mother receiving a note in an unfamiliar handwriting, relaying the information that her daughter was safe at Greymere, waiting for the roads. She thought about her mother's face when she read it. She did not think about it for long. Later in the morning, the rain eased briefly. Not stopped, but eased, and Clara went outside. The garden was not what she expected from a property the size of Greymere. It was not ornamental. There were fruit trees, heavy and old, and a kitchen garden that had been planted with the pragmatism of someone who expected to eat from it rather than look at it. The paths between the beds were stone, well laid, with no gaps for weeds to find purchase. Someone had thought about this garden the same way he thought about the roads. What does it need to work? What is getting in the way of it working? Remove that. Let the rest do what it naturally does. She was crouching to look at something near the old apple tree when she heard him come up behind her. That one was here when my grandfather bought the property, he said. They think it's about 80 years old. It still fruits? Every year. Not as much as it once did, but it doesn't know it's supposed to slow down. She stood up. They were close together in the narrow path between the beds. He did not step back. Neither did she. I found something, he said, that I think you should see. She looked at him. He was not performing this. She had been watching him for 2 days now, and she had learned the difference between the way he moved when he was simply occupying space, and the way he moved when something had weight for him. This had weight. All right, she said. He took her to the study, not the side room she had been using, but a different room at the back of the house that she had not been in yet. It was darker than the other rooms, lined with shelves, the kind of room that had been accumulating things for generations without anyone deciding what to keep and what to release. He went to the desk, opened the lower drawer, and removed a folder of papers that had the look of things that had been looked at many times over many years. He set them on the desk in front of her. These are the documents from the water right dispute, he said, 30 years ago, the official ones. She looked at them. She did not touch them yet. Why do you have these out? She said. Because you're here, he said. Because you said what you said this morning, and I've been thinking for 2 days about whether to show you, and I think you should see them. She looked at his face, then she looked at the papers, then she picked up the first one. She was not a lawyer. She was not trained to read legal documents, but she was educated and careful and patient, the qualities that had kept the Whitmore household functioning on a narrow income, and she read slowly and thoroughly. The documents told a story, not the story she had been given, not a clean opposing version either, something more complicated and more uncomfortable than either. Her grandfather, she learned, had agreed to the renegotiation of the water right. Not willingly. She could read the reluctance in the formal language, the notes in the margins, the word reasonable used in a way that suggested it was not felt to be reasonable at all. But he had agreed, because at the time the Whitmore family had needed something from the Ashford family, a loan that she had not known about, that had allowed them to survive a bad harvest, and the water right had been part of the settlement. The loan had been repaid. The water right had not been returned. It was not a story of simple theft. It was a story of two families in a complicated arrangement that had benefited both at the time and had later been used against one by the other. Her grandfather had not been a helpless victim. Her grandfather had made a deal that he had perhaps not fully understood the implications of, or had understood and had no better option, and the Ashford family had held that deal to a standard that was technically legal and practically cruel. She set the papers down. He was watching her from across the desk. My father knew this version, she said, not a question. I don't know what your father knew, he said, but your grandfather did. His signature is on the loan agreement. She stood very still. Outside, the rain was trying to start again, the way rain does when it has not quite decided whether to commit to another cycle. She could hear it against the window, small, preliminary. Why are you showing me this? She asked. He was quiet for a moment. Because you've been carrying a version of this story that puts your family entirely in the position of being wronged, he said. And I don't think that version is fair to you. I think it's a simplified version, and I think simplified versions are a way of protecting people that also prevents them from understanding what actually happened. She looked at him. My family was still hurt, she said. Yes, he said immediately. Completely. What my father did with that agreement was wrong. The letter of it may have been legal. The spirit of it was not. The water right should have been returned. It wasn't, and that cost your family significantly. I am not trying to argue that away. I'm saying the picture is more complex than a villain and a victim. She pulled out a chair and sat down, because her legs had asked her to. She sat for a long time. He sat on the other side of the desk and did not rush her, and did not fill the silence with more words. He simply waited, which was becoming a pattern she noticed in him, this willingness to give silence its due. My father never told me about the loan, she said. I know, he said quietly. He told me the version where we were entirely wronged. Yes. Maybe that's all he knew. Maybe. She looked at him. He met her eyes without flinching. Or maybe he knew and chose the version that was easier to carry, she said. He did not answer that. He did not need to. It was not a question she was asking him. It was a question she was asking herself, sitting in a room full of documents in the house of a man she had been raised to hate, finding out that reality was untidy and uncomfortable, and considerably more human than the clean story she had been given. She sat with that for a while. I need some air, she said. Of course. She went back to the garden, which was now being rained on lightly, and she stood under the old apple tree and looked at nothing in particular, and let the new information sit inside her, without trying to organize it into something manageable. Her father had been a good man. She believed that completely. He had also, possibly, simplified a story, because the complicated version required him to carry some discomfort that he had not wanted to carry, or had not had room for, or had genuinely not known, and she would probably never know which of those was true, and perhaps it was some combination of all of them. Her grandfather had made a deal in a hard year, a bad deal, or a deal that became bad and how it was used against them. He had survived that hard year, and lost the water right, and the family had lost the East Field, and here she was, 23 years later, standing under his apple tree in the rain. She did not cry. She was not that kind of woman, or perhaps she simply did not have the space for it right now. She went inside and found Nora and asked if there was anything useful she could do. Nora handed her a pile of vegetables without discussion and pointed at the cutting board. Clara chopped vegetables for an hour, steadily, with focus, and by the end of it the new information had not become manageable, but it had at least become familiar. It had stopped being a shock and started being simply a thing she knew now, one more true thing in the complicated collection of true things that made up the world. At dinner, they sat at the table again, and she ate and he ate, and neither of them mentioned the documents or the study or the apple tree. Tell me about the rest of the estate, she said instead. He looked up. Something in his face loosened fractionally, the way a person's face loosens when they are given permission to talk about something they care about. He talked about the estate, the tenant farms and their conditions, the mill that needed work, the family on the north end who had been having a difficult few years and whose rent he had quietly reduced. He talked the way people talk when they are not performing their goodness but simply reporting their life, the facts of it, what needed doing, and what had been done, and what was still ahead. She listened. She asked questions. He answered them. After dinner, she went to the side room and sat by the fire and thought about the difference between the man her father had described, inherited from his father, passed down like the hatred of a word, and the man who sat across a table and talked about his tenants and his roads and the apple tree that did not know it was supposed to slow down. She thought about the version she had been given. She thought about the person she had met. She thought about the distance between them, and whether that distance was a measure of dishonesty or simply of time, and whether she was brave enough to let the two things exist at once, the real harm that had been done, and the real person standing on the other side of it who had not been the one to do it. She did not reach a conclusion. She was not sure a conclusion was what this moment required. She watched the fire for a long time, and she thought about the thing she almost never let herself think, the thing that had crept in at the edges of the last 2 days without her permission, the simple and inconvenient fact that when he walked into a room she noticed it, and when he spoke she listened to it, and when he was somewhere she was not. She was aware of that too. She did not name it. She let it sit there in the firelight, unnamed, present, complicated. Outside, the rain made its decision and committed. It was going to be another night. She woke that night from a dream she did not remember and lay in the dark room listening to the rain, which had become a constant backdrop, something the house was accustomed to in a way that she was now beginning to be accustomed to also. She tried to think about home. She tried to picture her cottage, her lane, The kitchen table where she had sat 1,000 mornings with her hands wrapped around a cup of tea, and the ordinary predictability of her days arrayed before her like a familiar road. She could picture it perfectly, every detail. The crack in the window frame on the east side, the way the third stair creaked, her mother's chair by the fire, turned slightly toward the light for reading. But when she tried to feel it, when she tried to feel the comfort of it, the belonging she had always taken for granted, she found something slightly different there. Not absence, not loss. More like the sensation you get when you have been sitting in one position for a long time, and then you shift and realize, from the ache of moving, that something was uncomfortable all along, and you had simply become so used to it that you stopped registering it. She did not know what to do with that either. She turned onto her side and listened to the rain and waited for morning. The third morning she came downstairs and he was at the desk and there was tea, and she sat across from him, and they both read. She a book she had found on the shelf with the broken-spined volumes, he his letters. It should have been awkward. It was not. Around mid-morning he stood and said, "I have to go and see the Harton tenant farm this afternoon. The flooding may have reached the lower barn. Would you like to come?" She looked up from the book. "Why?" she asked. He thought about it for a moment, which was something she had noticed he did. He actually thought about things before he said them, rather than filling the space immediately with words. Because it's better to have two pairs of eyes when you're assessing damage. And because you've been inside for 2 days and the rain has slowed enough that it would be a reasonable walk. She considered this. "All right," she said. The walk to the Harton farm took them across fields that were soft but passable, along a track that ran between 2 old hedgerows, and gave them some shelter from the remaining wind. He walked beside her, not slightly ahead the way some men walked with women, as if the pace were theirs to set by birthright, but beside her, adjusting without appearing to adjust. She noticed everything like this now. She could not seem to stop noticing. The Harton farm was occupied by a family named Colby. The father, a man called Edmund Colby, came out to meet them with the particular expression of someone who is worried, but has decided that showing worry is a form of weakness they cannot afford. His wife stood in the doorway behind him, and there were children visible at the window, 2 of them, watching with the frank curiosity of children who do not yet know they are supposed to disguise their interest. He greeted Edmund without formality. No performance of rank. He shook the man's hand, asked the direct question about the barn, listened to the answer without interruption. He looked at the lower barn, which had taken on 2 feet of water in the night. He assessed it quickly, without theater. "It'll need draining and the floor checking," he said. "Do you have what you need for that?" Edmund Colby looked at him steadily. "I'll manage. If you need anything from the estate, send word." He said it plainly. He did not make it a gift or a condescension. He said it as a neighbor would say it. Edmund Colby nodded. His wife, from the doorway, said thank you, and he acknowledged it with a slight inclination of his head. Walking back, Clara said, "He would not have come to you." "No," he said. "But he might have lost the barn contents if the water had sat longer." "Yes." "So coming was your way of making it easier for him to accept help without having to ask." He walked in silence for a moment. "Something like that," he said. She thought about this. She thought about all the ways there were to do a kind thing, and whether the kindness was diminished by being done quietly, and whether it was diminished by her having noticed it. She decided it was not. They walked back mostly in silence, but it was the kind of silence that had content in it, that was full rather than empty, that contained 2 people thinking thoughts that were connected without needing to be spoken. Near the gate of the estate he stopped. She stopped too. He was looking at the stone wall, the one that ran along the property boundary, the one she had seen from the road when she was deciding whether to come in. "You almost didn't come in," he said. It was not quite a question. "No," she said, "I almost didn't." "What made you?" She looked at the wall. "I was very cold," she said. He looked at her. The corner of his mouth moved slightly. Not quite a smile, something adjacent to one. "I'm glad you were cold," he said. She looked at him for a moment. "So am I," she said, and meant it, and was surprised by how much she meant it. They went back inside. Nora had lunch ready. They ate it, and the rain came back in the afternoon, lighter now, more resigned than aggressive. And he read and she read, and the fire burned, and the day passed in that particular way of days that are outwardly quiet and inwardly very busy. That evening she sat with her tea and she thought, clearly and without flinching, about the fact that she did not hate him, had not hated him, she suspected, from the first moment the door opened and he stood there with his lamp and his complete absence of theater. She had been looking for a reason to hate him from the inside, a confirmation of the word her father had said in the voice her father had said it in, and she had not found one. She had found instead a man who fixed roads and visited flooded farms, and talked about his apple tree, and sat in silence without filling it with himself. She had found someone she would have liked if she had met him without the weight of everything else. Perhaps, she thought, looking at the fire, she liked him anyway. Perhaps the weight of everything else was something you could put down. She did not know yet, but she thought about it. For the first time, she actually thought about it. The road home looked the same as it always had. Same loose stone, same narrow curve, same familiar dip 300 yards from the cottage where rainwater always gathered, and her boot would find it if she was not paying attention. She paid attention, she stepped around the dip, but everything else was different. She had walked this road 10,000 times with the weight of the county on her shoulders, the weight of her family's name, the weight of knowing exactly what was required of her and delivering it. She walked it now carrying something new that she had not named yet and did not intend to name in the open air where the wind might hear it. The storm had released the county on the fourth morning, quiet and complete, the way a headache lifts while you are sleeping, and you wake to discover the pain is simply gone. He had told her the lower road was clear. He had told her it without ceremony, the same way he said everything, and she had gone upstairs and packed the few things she had, which were few because she had arrived with almost nothing, and come back downstairs with her coat that Nora had dried and returned pressed. He had been standing in the entrance hall. She had not expected that. She had expected Nora, or to simply find the door and let herself out. She had not expected him to be standing in the hall in the way of someone who was waiting without wanting to appear to be waiting. "The lane through Pembury is the quickest," he said. "I know it," she said. "Yes." A pause. "Of course you do." She had looked at him. He had looked at her. Between them was everything that had happened in 4 days, and everything that had not happened, and everything that was neither fully one thing nor fully another. "Thank you," she said. "For everything." He nodded, just once, as if the words were received and understood and did not require amplification. She walked out the door. She did not look back. Not because she was afraid of what she would feel if she did, but because she understood instinctively that this was not yet the right moment for looking back. This was the moment for walking forward, and she walked forward, all the way home, while the sky emptied of clouds and the first pale version of the sun appeared above the eastern hills. Her mother was at the window when she came up the lane. She saw the shape of her there before she could see her face. When she pushed the cottage door open, her mother was already standing in the kitchen with her hands clasped in front of her and her face doing the work of controlled relief. "You're all right," her mother said. "I'm all right." Her mother looked at her. She had a way of looking that covered more ground than other people's questions. She looked for a moment, and then she said, "You must be cold. Sit down." She was not cold. She had been cold 4 days ago. She was not cold now. She sat at the kitchen table while her mother made tea, and moved through the kitchen with the familiar rhythm of the cottage, and the familiar sounds of their ordinary life. And Clara looked at the crack in the window frame on the east side, and the third stair which she could not see but could imagine, and she felt the shape of the place around her, the life she had always inhabited. It fit, it was hers, she was glad to be in it. But there was something else in her now, something that had not been there before she left, and it was present and real, and it sat beside the familiarity of home, without any intention of leaving. The note said Graymere, her mother said. She said it carefully, from the position of the stove, not turning around. "Yes," Clara said. Her mother put the cups on the table and sat down. She looked at her daughter. "Tell me," her mother said. Clara told her, not all of it, the part that was tellable, the storm, the gate, the door, the fire, the days of waiting. She told it plainly and without editorializing, and when she had finished, she picked up her cup and waited. Her mother sat with it for a long moment. "He treated you properly," she said. "It was not quite a question." "Yes. And Nora is still there. I know Nora from the village. She's a reliable woman." "She is." Her mother wrapped both hands around her cup. She looked at the table. "Your father," she began, and then stopped, and began again. "Your father had strong feelings. I know. He came by them honestly," her mother said. "What happened to this family was real, Clara. Whatever else is true. I know that too," Clara said. Her mother looked at her again with that looking of hers. "But," she said. Clara met her eyes. "There is no but," she said carefully. "The harm was real. I believe that completely. I also believe that the man who opened that door is not the same person who caused it." A pause. "He is the same family," her mother said. "Yes, Clara said. So are we. Her mother was quiet for a long time. The cottage settled around them, its familiar creaks and sighs, the clock on the shelf measuring the silence. Be careful, her mother said finally. That's all I'm saying. Be careful. Clara nodded. I'm always careful. I know you are. Her mother stood, took her cup to the counter, looked out the window at the lane. I know you are. 3 weeks passed. Clara did not go to Greymere. She did not write. She went about the work of her ordinary life, the cottage, the village, the gradual returning of winter to something manageable. She carried firewood and mended things and visited old Mrs. Perrin about those herbs and attended the twice-monthly gathering at the church hall, where the county's women coordinated the various small acts of mutual support that kept a rural community functioning. She did not think about him constantly. She thought about him regularly. There was a difference, and she was aware of it. She heard his name in the village. She always heard his name in the village. She had been hearing it her whole life, but now she listened differently. She heard, 3 weeks after the storm, that the county council had formally agreed to take over the maintenance of the East Road, prompted apparently by a letter from the Duke of Greymere that had laid out the drainage problem with such clarity and such documentation that refusing to act on it would have been professionally embarrassing for the council members. She heard this from a woman at the grain merchant's stall who said it with mild admiration and no awareness of what it meant to the woman she was telling it to. 4 weeks after the storm, her cousin Oliver came to visit. Oliver was 6 years older than Clara and had been in a position, for as long as she could remember, of believing himself to be the person in the family who handled things. He was not an unkind man. He was a man who thought in straight lines, and life in Hartwell had not yet given him enough experiences that required lines of any other kind. He sat at the kitchen table where Clara had sat on the day she came home, and he held his cup with both hands the way men hold cups when they are about to say something they have been holding for a while, and he said it. I've heard something from the village, he said. You've heard something from the village, was Oliver's way of saying he had heard something that had been told to him deliberately, by someone who wanted it said. Clara waited. People are saying you spent 4 days at Greymere, he said. People are correct, she said. Clara. I was caught in the storm. Every road out was flooded. I needed shelter. The nearest shelter was Greymere. I used it. I am alive. All of those things are connected. Oliver set his cup down. It's not the shelter that concerns me. Then what concerns you? He looked at her steadily. Your name, your reputation, your family's standing. 4 days, Clara. People talk. People have been talking about this family since before I was born, she said. They've been talking about the Ashfords even longer. I am not going to apologize for being alive. Nobody is asking you to apologize for being alive. Then what are they asking? A pause. That you be clear about where your loyalty sits, he said. The Ashford family has not been a friend to us. She looked at her cousin. She thought about the documents on the study desk, the complicated story that her father had simplified into something easier to carry, the East Creek and the loan, and the 30 years of the simplified version being passed down. I am loyal to my family, she said. I am also capable of making my own assessments. Your assessment of the Duke of Greymere, Oliver said, and his voice was not unkind, simply concerned in the way of someone who believes he sees clearly, is affected by the fact that he took care of you during a hard situation. That is natural. It is also not the whole picture. Oliver, she said, and she kept her voice steady and level, the voice she had been trained to keep. I have seen the whole picture, or closer to it than you have. I am asking you to trust that I am not a foolish person. He looked at her for a long moment. I don't think you're foolish, he said. I think, her mother said from the doorway, which neither of them had heard open, that this is a conversation we are all too tired for right now. Oliver and Clara both looked at her. Her mother came into the kitchen and sat at the table with the manner of a woman who had made a decision. The storm happened, she said. Clara survived it. She was treated with respect and came home in one piece. Whatever Oliver has heard in the village will pass, because new things always happen, and people will talk about those instead. She looked at her nephew. You are welcome to be concerned, but you are not welcome to come into my kitchen and make my daughter feel that surviving a storm is something she ought to be ashamed of. Oliver was quiet for a moment. I'm not saying that, he said. Good, her mother said. Then we agree. He left shortly after, not angry but thoughtful, which was the best possible version of Oliver when he had not got what he came for. Clara sat with her mother after he was gone, and did not speak for a while. Thank you, she said eventually. Her mother shook her head once. I meant what I said to him, she said. But Clara, she waited until her daughter looked at her. Whatever you are feeling, take your time with it. Whatever you are thinking, be sure you are thinking it for yourself and not for the novelty of it, or the contrast of it, or because being kept in a warm house during a storm is a pleasant thing that attaches itself to the person who provided it. Clara held her mother's gaze. "I know the difference," she said. "I know you do," her mother said. "I'm saying it anyway, because that is what mothers do." Clara nodded. The cottage held them in its familiar way. The clock ticked. The fire thought about going out and decided not to. "He showed me the documents," Clara said. "The water right, the loan from 30 years ago." Her mother was very still. "Did he?" she said quietly. "You knew about the loan," Clara said. A long silence. "Your father knew," her mother said. "He chose to carry the version that was easier for him to carry. I didn't agree with his choice, but I respected it because he had other things to carry that I could see and he could not." Clara sat with that. "The harm was still real," she said. "The harm was real," her mother agreed. "And people are more complicated than the harm they've caused or received." She looked at her hands. "That's what makes all of this hard." Clara sat in the kitchen and looked at the crack in the window frame and thought about hard things, and the people on either side of them. Outside, the lane was dry again. The storm was over. But the world it had left behind was not the same world that had been there before it arrived, and Clara understood, sitting at the kitchen table, that some changes were not reversible, and that not all irreversible changes were losses. She wrote him a letter that night. She had not planned to. She sat at the small desk in her room, with a candle and a sheet of paper and a pen, and she looked at the paper for a long time, then she wrote. She thanked him properly, which she had done at the door but not in writing, not in the way that a letter allowed, with space to mean what you said, and say it completely. She thanked him for the fire and the room and the food and the stable hand who had ridden the long way around the north road to tell her mother she was safe. She thanked him for the documents. She did not explain what she had done with the information. She did not lay out her conclusions or the conversation with her mother or the visit from Oliver. She simply said that she had read them, and that she thought them over, and that they had changed her understanding of some things, and that she was grateful he had trusted her with them. She ended the letter with her name, plain and without decoration. She folded it. She addressed it. She left it on the desk to look at in the morning, to make sure in the light of a new day she still meant what she had said, and still wanted to send it. In the morning, she still meant it. She sent it. 3 days later, a letter came back. It was written in the same small, careful handwriting she recognized from his maps. It was not long. He thanked her for writing. He said he was glad she had arrived home safely, and that he was glad she found her way to the gate when she did. He said that the apple tree had dropped its last apples in the storm, and he had found them scattered across the garden like something deliberate, like something that had been waiting for the right moment to let go. He said he hoped the lane near her cottage had dried out. He said he hoped her mother's knee was improving. He did not say anything about the documents or the feud or the complicated, uncomfortable human thing that the history of their families actually was. He did not need to. The letter was not about those things. The letter was about an apple tree and a flooded lane, and two people who had found a way, in a storm, to see each other as people. She read it twice. She put it in the drawer of the small desk in her room, next to the things she kept there that mattered to her. She went about her day. She did not think in terms of what might happen next. She was a practical woman who lived in a practical world, and she knew that what might happen next was shaped by many things, by time and by community, and by the slow, difficult work of two families with a complicated history finding a way to exist differently with each other, which was not a thing that happened quickly or cleanly or without cost. But she also knew that she had knocked on a door and it had opened, and that the person on the other side of it had been a person, and that she had seen that, and could not unsee it, and did not want to. That was enough for now. That was, in its quiet way, everything. The letters became a rhythm she had not planned for. Every 2 weeks, sometimes 3, something arrived with the Graymere seal. Every time, she sat at her desk in the afternoon light and read it carefully before she answered. His letters were not what she expected. They were not romantic in any conventional sense. They were not declarations or requests or any of the things that letters between a man and a woman were supposed to be. They were reports, almost. The estate, the farms, the road work, the county council meeting that had gone better than expected. He wrote the way he spoke, without decoration, but the things he chose to include told her what he noticed and what he thought worth noticing, and that, she found, told her a great deal. She wrote back in kind. The village, her mother's knee which was improving, the Pembury barn that Edmund Colby had repaired himself without asking anyone for anything, The first good day of spring when the light came back in a different way, and the whole county seemed to exhale. She wrote about the apple trees in the orchard behind the church, which were old and not as productive as they once had been, and which nobody had properly tended in years. He wrote back, in the next letter, that there was a technique for encouraging old fruit trees that involved specific pruning at a specific time of year, and offered, if she were interested, to ask his groundskeeper to look at the church orchard and assess what was needed. She wrote back and said yes. She told her mother. Her mother said, "That's a kind thing." She said yes. Her mother said nothing more about it. Oliver heard about the letters. She had not told him. Someone in the village had seen the Graymere seal on an envelope, because someone in the village always saw everything, and Oliver came to call with the particular expression of a man who has prepared an argument and is committed to making it. He made it. She listened. She said, "I hear you, Oliver. I'm not going to stop." He stared at her. "I'm not going to stop," she said again, because the second time removed the possibility that the first time had been uncertainty. "I know what our family has been through. I know what his family did. I also know that he is not the person who did it, and I am not going to spend the rest of my life refusing to know people because of what their parents were. If you would like to discuss this further, I am available on any day except Tuesdays, which is when I help Mrs. Perrin with her preserves." Oliver left. He came back 2 weeks later and did not mention the letters, which was the closest Oliver was capable of coming to acceptance. The groundskeeper from Graymere came in April. His name was Henry, and he was an older man who walked through the church orchard with his hands clasped behind his back, and looked at things for a long time before he spoke. He spoke to the vicar, who was delighted by anyone who showed interest in the orchard, and he explained what needed doing and said he would come back the following week with the right tools. He came back the following week. He brought 2 young men from the estate. They worked quietly and efficiently, and left the orchard looking, Clara thought, the way the orchard must have looked years ago, before it was left to sort itself out. The Duke was not among them. She had not expected him to be. She had seen him only once since the storm, in the village, in February, from a distance, both of them aware of each other, and both of them not quite ready for whatever the public version of being aware of each other looked like in Hartwell. He had nodded to her. She had nodded to him. They had both continued in their respective directions. It was exactly as awkward as it sounds, and also, underneath the awkwardness, it was something else. Something that had a different quality to it. Something that was not cold. May came and brought the county fair. The county fair was the event that made avoidance impossible, because every family in Hartwell attended, and the fairground was not large enough to avoid anyone for more than 40 minutes at a time. Clara had been going to the county fair her whole life. She had a usual routine, usual things she looked at, usual people she sought out, and she went through this routine on the first afternoon, and was buying honey from the keeper on the far side of the main ground, when she turned and found him standing 2 stalls over. He was looking at something on a table of seedlings. He had not seen her yet. She had approximately 3 seconds before he would look up, and the moment of choice would be gone. She walked over to him. He looked up when she was close enough that looking up was inevitable. Something in his face changed when he saw her. Not dramatically, just changed the way a room changes when you open a window. "Clara," he said. Nobody in Hartwell was close enough to hear it. It did not matter. She heard it. "The orchard looks better," she said. "Henry said the trees will need another year to show real improvement," he said. "But the groundwork is done." "It was kind," she said. The vicar was very pleased. He nodded. He looked at her and then looked at the seedlings on the table, as if he were giving both of them a moment to stand on even ground. "I've been thinking about something," he said, to the seedlings, "and I think I would rather say it directly than continue to say it in letters by degrees." She waited. He looked at her. "I would like to know you," he said, "not in the way of people who happen to exchange correspondence. I mean properly, as people who make time for each other deliberately and do not pretend they are not doing that." The fair continued around them. Someone's child ran past chasing a dog. A man at the honey stall called out his prices. A horse somewhere on the far side of the ground contributed its opinion about something. Clara looked at him. "Our families have a history," she said. "Yes. Hartwell has opinions. Also yes. And you're saying you would like to proceed anyway." He met her eyes. "I'm saying I would like to proceed because of, not in spite of. Because the fact that we are capable of standing in the same field at the same fair and having this conversation, after everything, tells me something about who you are that I would be very sorry to walk away from." She was quiet for a long moment. "My mother will want to meet you properly," she said. Something shifted in his expression. Not quite a smile. A different thing. warmer than a smile and quieter. "I expected nothing less," he said. She held out her hand. He looked at it for a moment, then shook it. The kind of handshake that means something other than hello, that means an agreement between two people who have thought about it and chosen it. "Tuesday," she said. "We have tea on Tuesdays. Come at 3. She went back to the fair. She bought the honey. She found Mrs. Perrin near the vegetable competition and stood with her for half an hour, being informed about whose parsnips were being unfairly overlooked. And she listened with genuine attention and had opinions about the parsnips, because Mrs. Perrin and her parsnips were part of her life, and would continue to be part of her life, and she was glad of it. She saw him once more across the fairground near the end of the afternoon. He was talking to one of the tenant farmers she recognized from the Greymere land, and the farmer was nodding and gesturing, and the Duke was listening with the kind of full attention she had come to recognize as characteristic. He did not see her looking. She went home with her honey and her collected impressions of the afternoon, and sat with her mother in the kitchen, and told her a Duke was coming for tea on Tuesday. Her mother put down her cup. She looked at her daughter. "Tell me," she said. Clara told her. Her mother listened the way she always listened, taking everything in and letting it settle before she formed a response. When Clara had finished, she looked at the table for a moment, and then she looked at the window, and then she looked at her daughter. "Your father would have said no," she said. "I know." "I do not think your father would have been right to say no," she said. "I think he would have said it from pain, which is understandable, but pain is not always the best navigator." Clara looked at her mother. "Tell me what you know of him," her mother said. "Everything, not the letters, what you saw." She told her. Greymere, the door, the fire, Nora, the maps, the documents, the flooded farm in Edmund Colby's face, and the Duke who had arranged to give a man help without making him feel he was receiving it. The apple tree. The way he said things once and let them land, and did not need to say them again. She talked for a long time. Her mother listened. When she had finished, her mother said, "He sounds like a man who learned something from watching his father do things wrong." "Yes," Clara said. "That is what he is. That is a particular kind of person," her mother said. "It requires something specific to become that. It requires paying attention, and having the courage to disagree with what you inherited." She paused. Not everyone can do that. Clara thought about herself, and the simplified version of the feud she had carried, and the moment she had pushed open the gate in the storm, and everything after it. "No," she said, "not everyone. He came on Tuesday. He came at 3 exactly, which she had expected, because he was the kind of man who said he would come at 3 and came at 3. He sat at the kitchen table, where the feud had been discussed many times over many years, and he sat without performing anything, without rank or apology, just a person sitting at a table. Her mother made tea. She sat across from him and looked at him with the direct attention of a woman who had survived things, and learned from that survival to see people clearly, to not accept the comfortable version when the true version was available. He met her gaze without flinching. "You know what your family did to mine," her mother said, not cruelly, as a fact that needed to be in the room. "Yes," he said. "Tell me what you know." He told her. The water right, the loan. The way a legal arrangement had been used against people who were already at a disadvantage. He was accurate, and he was clear, and he did not soften the parts that did not reflect well on his father. Clara's mother sat with her cup and looked at him for a long time. "What do you intend to do about it?" she said. He was quiet for a moment. "I can't undo it," he said. "The Eastfield is gone. The water right is gone. If there were a way to return something real, I would do it." He paused. "There may be ways to do something useful. I have been thinking about it." Her mother looked at him. "I don't want anything from you," she said. "My daughter is not a settlement." "No," he said, and he said it as if the idea had not occurred to him, and was not welcome now that it had. "She is not. This is not connected." "Then what is it connected to?" He looked at Clara, briefly, and then back at her mother. "The fact that your daughter is the most honest person I have met in a long time," he said, "and that when I opened my door in a storm, I found someone I did not expect to find, and I have not stopped thinking about it since." The kitchen was quiet. Her mother sat with her tea and her thoughts and her long, careful way of assessing things. "You understand," she said, "that this family has people in the village, cousins, friends, people who will see what is happening and have feelings about it. Strong feelings." "I understand. You are going to be the one who receives most of the contempt," she said. "If this goes anywhere, you are the Ashford trying to enter a family you wronged. My daughter will be given sympathy. You will be given suspicion." "I know that." And you're prepared for that. It's the correct distribution, he said. Her mother looked at him for a long moment. You have good values, she said finally. Your family gave you bad ones and you replaced them. That's harder than people think. He did not respond to that. He looked at the table. I'll expect you for dinner on Sunday, her mother said. Clara makes a very good roast. He looked up. Thank you, he said. He stayed for an hour. He ate 2 slices of the cake Nora had apparently sent him with, which he produced from a bag with a slight expression of someone who has been told to bring something and has obeyed. Her mother ate a slice and said it was very good, which Clara knew was her way of approving of Nora specifically and the whole situation generally. When he left, her mother went to the window and watched him walk back down the lane. He walks well, she said. Clara looked at her. That is what you're taking away from this afternoon? Among other things, her mother said, and the small smile at the corner of her mouth was the smile she kept for things she had decided were good, but was not going to announce yet, because announcement was its own kind of jinx, and she was too old and too experienced to tempt things. That evening, Clara walked to the end of the lane by herself, the way she sometimes walked in the evenings when she needed the air and the space and the simple sensation of moving through the world under her own power. The sky was clear, the first truly clear sky in what felt like months, and the light was doing something lovely with the hills to the east. She stood at the end of the lane and looked at it. She thought about the gate in the rain, the cold behind her eyes, the hand raised to knock and the pause before she knocked. She thought about the version of herself who had stood there, certain of exactly who she was and what she was supposed to be and what she was supposed to hate. She thought about who she was now, standing in the clear evening, with a different version of the story in her chest and a letter in her drawer, and a duke who was coming for dinner on Sunday, and a mother who had said he walked well. The feud was still there, not gone, not resolved. 30 years of real harm did not disappear because 2 people made tea in a kitchen. Her father's grief was still real. The Eastfield was still gone. But she was not the feud. She was a person who had carried it, and had, in a storm, in a gate, in 4 days of rain, found a way to set it down without betraying anyone who mattered. She was still standing, still herself. Just herself with fewer inherited certainties and more room for the actual world. That seemed like the right direction. She walked back up the lane toward the cottage, where the light in the kitchen window was warm and familiar and waiting. The lane was dry. The storm was done. Something else was beginning. Sunday came the way the best Sundays do, with a cold, clear morning that warmed by noon, and a sky that behaved itself. She had started the roast before church, and it was in the oven when she came home, the cottage smelling of it. Her mother moving through the kitchen with the particular efficiency of someone who has a guest coming and has decided the guest will be fed properly regardless of the complicated feelings surrounding the occasion. Clara set the table. She set 3 places, which was one more than they ever set, and she stood back and looked at the 3 plates and thought about how a table is a simple thing, and how a simple thing can carry enormous weight without looking any different from the outside. He arrived at 2, as she had asked, so that there was an hour before dinner for the kind of conversation that settles things before the formality of a meal. He came to the door himself, no carriage, which meant he had walked or ridden, and he arrived with clean boots and the same lack of ceremony he brought to everything. Clara's mother answered the door. They stood on the step, the 2 of them, and Clara watched from the kitchen doorway. Her mother looked at him. He looked at her mother. Something passed between them that was not words and was not nothing. Come in, her mother said, and she stood aside. He came in. The cottage that had always felt exactly the right size for 2 people felt different with a third, not too small, but more present, more aware of itself. He sat where he was directed, by the fire, and her mother sat opposite him, and Clara brought tea, and the afternoon began. They talked, not carefully, not performing safety at each other, but actually talked. Her mother told him about the county in the years before he inherited, the way things had worked and the way they had not worked, and he listened and asked questions that showed he was thinking and not simply being polite. He told her about the first years of managing the estate, the things he had found that needed changing, the tenants he had gone to see personally, because he had thought it important to understand what the land actually was, rather than what the books said it was. Her mother listened in turn. At some point, without any announcement, the conversation became the kind that you do not perform but simply have, the kind that exists between people who have found a common language without planning to. Clara sat between them and watched it happen, and felt something quiet and solid settle in her chest. After dinner, while her mother was in the kitchen, he came to stand beside her at the window. Outside, the lane was pale in the late afternoon light, the hedgerows on either side of it still leafless but with something new in them. A green suggestion at the ends of the branches that was not yet leaves but was the intention of leaves. "Your mother," he said quietly, "is a remarkable woman." "Yes," Clara said. "She is. She told me, while you were getting the second course, that if I was in any way dishonest with you, at any point, about anything, she had a cousin with a very large property and a great deal of time on his hands who would be happy to make things difficult for me at every county council meeting for the foreseeable future." Clara looked at him. He looked at her. "She said it pleasantly," he added. "She always does," Clara said. The corner of his mouth moved. She had been watching that almost smile for months in her mind, trying to reconstruct the exact quality of it from a few days and a handful of meetings, and here it was beside her again, and it was exactly as she had remembered, and also slightly better because it was real. "I should go before the light goes completely," he said. "Yes." He turned to face her properly. They were close together, the cottage window and the late afternoon not leaving much room for distance. "I meant what I said at the fair," he said, "not as a declaration, just as a fact I wanted you to have, clearly." "I know," she said. "I meant what I said back." He looked at her for a moment, then he looked at the lane outside. "There's an old well on the east boundary of my land," he said, "near the line that used to mark where your family's east field began. I've been thinking about it." She looked at him. "The water table there is good," he said. "The well is deep and it doesn't fail in dry years. I've been thinking about whether there's a way to make some use of it for the land on this side of the boundary. Legally, properly, not a gesture, something real." She was quiet for a moment. "You don't owe us that," she said. "No," he said, "but I'd like to do something that is true rather than symbolic. If you and your mother would be open to discussing it." She looked at the lane, at the hedgerows with their suggestion of new leaves. "Talk to my mother about it," she said. "She'll have opinions." "I would expect nothing less," he said. Her mother appeared at the kitchen doorway to say goodbye, which she did, with the warmth she gave to people she had decided deserved it, and the directness she gave to everyone regardless. He thanked her for dinner. He thanked Clara for the afternoon. He walked out the cottage door and down the lane and did not look back, because that, she had understood by now, was his way. He said things and then let them be said, and walked forward without needing to watch the effect. She watched him until the lane curved and took him out of sight. Then she went back inside. Her mother was at the table with the last of the tea, looking at nothing particular with the expression she wore when she was arriving at a conclusion that had been in progress for some time. "Well," her mother said. Clara sat down. "Well?" Her mother looked at her, a long look. "Your father," she said, "would have come around, eventually. He was a stubborn man, but he was not an unjust one, and when the evidence was clear enough, he followed it." She picked up her cup. "He would have taken longer than I'm going to take." Clara looked at her. "I'm not telling you to rush into anything," her mother said. "I'm telling you that I have looked at the man who just ate dinner at this table, and I have listened to how he talks and what he says when he doesn't know I am particularly paying attention, and I think he is a person of genuine worth." She put her cup down. "Whatever you decide, that is my read of it. You asked for my opinion and that is it." "I didn't ask," Clara said. "No," her mother agreed, "but I gave it anyway. That is also what mothers do." Clara sat with the warmth of the afternoon and the smell of the roast and the sound of the cottage settling into evening around her. She thought about the gate in the rain, the knock, the door, the man with the lamp. She thought about what it cost to walk through a door that went against everything you had been taught, and whether the cost was worth it. She knew the answer. She had known it, she thought, from the moment she stepped inside and felt the warmth, and looked at the man who had opened the door and found nothing on his face except the simple, unremarkable, transformative fact of welcome. She had been raised knowing exactly who she was supposed to be in Hartwell, in this county, in this family, with this history. She was still that person. She was also more than that person now. Outside, the last light left the lane. The hedgerows went still. The first few evening stars appeared in the space above the elm at the property's edge, faint and definite. She sat at the kitchen table in the house where she had grown up and thought about next Sunday. She was already looking forward to it.